Hi, my friends. I do this work with all my heart for you. So please contribute generously to Future Primitive. Well, my friends who listen to Future Primitive, I am presently laughing with Phillip Sheperd, the author of New Self, New World, Recovering Our Senses in the 21st Century. It's a North Atlantic book. You can get it on Amazon or on Phillip Sheperd's website, which is phillipsheperd.com. And you might have noticed by now that I am doing a monthly interview with Phillip Sheperd because I have been so enchanted by his book. There is very, very much wisdom in his writing and in his speaking, and I'm just loving going deeper with Phillip once a month. So I think this is going to be my introduction, and I will just say, Phillip Sheperd, is there anything else you'd like to say to people to introduce yourself if this is the first time they listen to you on Future Primitive?
Wow. To introduce myself, I don't know. I might just say how grateful I am for this crazy life I've lived that's taken me so many places and introduced me to such a phenomenal range of people. It's just been wonderful, and I'm just coming off a weekend workshop that I taught, and there's sort of a warm afterglow from that, because in a weekend workshop you meet people so intimately, and I think you see the very best sides of them, and I carry within me the sort of delicious afterglow of that at the moment.
So, Phillip, what is it that you taught? Would you tell us about it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What I teach is really the practical side of the sort of larger context that's painted by my book, and my book shows how we have abandoned wholeness in our lives as a culture. We've sort of turned our backs on it, and it's such a given. We're so habituated to it that we barely notice its absence, except in the anxieties that live with us constantly. And part of what's happened is we have come to define success in a way that stands completely independent of any concept of wholeness. So we pursue our notions of success, and if wholeness takes a hit, that's collateral damage. It's sort of to be expected, and our wholeness does indeed take a hit. So in the workshop, there's a series of exercises or practices that, for example, I introduce the concept of a whole body breath, and it's such a subtle thing what we do to the breath, the way we shut it out of so many different parts of the body. And for example, the back. The phrase just came to mind. We turn our backs on our backs.
Wow.
And we really do. There's so much sensitivity. There's so much awareness. The back, an awareness of the back opens you to a whole dimension. Your whole life sits at your back. Your ancestors sit there. There's a divine presence at your back that is so ready to catch you in its arms and help you forward. And we shut down the breath to the back in a way that dulls us to that. And so as a consequence, we move to our fronts. And when you're in the front of your body, you're in a presentation mode. And anytime you're in a presentation mode, you're standing in isolation from the world around you because you are presenting yourself to the world, and so there's no chance of a sort of seamless connectivity between them. And the back is a completely different thing. With the awareness at your back, you move into a receptivity that sort of gathers present and past and body together in a single sensitivity that opens your heart to what is here now. And so the workshop, there's so many areas in the body that shut down to the breath, and we sort of work on those and open the body to the breath. We open the. One question I pose in the workshop is, what is the difference between receptivity and presence? And I find it an interesting question. And we bat it around for a bit, and ultimately we sort of come to the conclusion that it's very difficult to find anything that separates receptivity from presence. And so then you realize, being present, it's not an act of will. It's a surrender. It's an opening to the present in such a way that allows the present to live within you. As you really allow the present to touch your core, it lives there. So instead of hearing the world with your ears, you're feeling its sounds from your core. Instead of seeing the world with your eyes, you're feeling its sights from your core. It's touching your core and informing you at such a deep level. Now that almost laying of hands on your core by the present is something that generally doesn't happen because we tend to wrap our core up in so many layers of defense and distance and separation, and we're not aware of that. And all of those live in the body. So in the course of the workshop, we sort of go through those layers and identify them. And half the time, more than half the time, most of the time, the participants in the workshop will say, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that shadow in the body was there." And then when you find those shadows, it's like finding a bit of yourself that you've secluded or abandoned, and what it needs, what that part of you needs, is your love. It needs your acceptance, and in the same way that a child looking at you wants to be seen and needs to be seen. Especially, a child needs to be seen by its caregivers, its mother, and that part of you in that same way needs to be seen with love. And then this little miracle happens where it softens and dissipates and comes back to the whole. So the workshop really is a kind of a gentle series of experiences that bring us back to that lovely state of ease and softness and presence and receptivity, and there. I talk in the workshop about two sort of markers of wholeness, and one of those markers is that when you're whole, you have that sense that the present is able to touch your core. Yet any division within the self will tend to interrupt the present and hold it somewhere else in the body. It won't be able to touch your core. And I literally think of the core, I literally think of that as a place that rests deep in the pelvic bowl. And the other marker of wholeness for me is that you're never doing two things. When we go into a place of doing something, whether it's rolling out dough, whatever it might be, if you're task oriented and you just sort of have to do this thing, and so you go and do it, you're in a place of doing that is taking you out of the present. When you're allowing yourself that receptivity that invites the present into your body, then your doing is no longer just a goal-oriented activity. Your doing is an experience of the present, and it nourishes you in a completely different way.
Well, what about fear, Philip? How do we deal with what can we do? How can we tend? How can we care for the fear that keeps us out of the present? Maybe a fear that comes from real pain from the past, at moments where we were feeling very alive and we presented ourselves to the present in a very alive way, and then something created a lot of pain within ourselves.
It's a huge issue. Dealing with that kind of trauma which doesn't live in the body. And there's no sort of, if you do this, the fear will go, or the pain will be alleviated. But here in the context of my work, what I find is that region in the pelvic bowl is the place in which our genius for integration lives. And fear is always about separation in one way or another. And we, our response to fear is to try to control, usually, to anticipate, to resist, to hold back, to outthink, to maneuver. And all of those activities tend to take us up high in the body. I talk of that shift in weight as an anticipatory weight that brings you up high and puts you off balance. So in my experience, what I've found is that if you can do that patient, loving work, that is able to return you to the pelvic bowl, which is a return to home. It's like coming home to yourself. We live in our heads, and God bless our abstract faculties of reason, but it's not home. And so I liken that journey back down to the pelvic bowl to the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, where Orpheus was this brilliantly gifted musician whose art was of such power that when he played his music, armies at war would put down their weapons, and lions and lambs would lie beside each other. It just drew the world into the singularity of its his betrothed Eurydice on the day of their marriage was killed and was taken to the underworld. And that, to me, that represents the separation on a mythic level of our female being from our male-centered consciousness of doing. And that's the schism of our age, that our thinking has been disconnected from our being, in the fallacious idea that we can think better if we're not distracted by our being, and our doing has been separated from our being in the same kind of fallacious notion. So there's Orpheus, separated in the upper world from Eurydice in the lower world, in Pluto's realm. And he determines to go and visit her. And no mortal has done this, and all he has is his music. And he enters that dark corridor leading to the underworld and meets horrors along the way. He meets the shades with their deadly flittings. He meets the three-headed dog. He meets all these perils. And at every station, with every horde he encounters, he plays his music. And his art softens and harmonizes the shades, the three-headed dog, the horrors on the way, until finally he arrives in Pluto's lair and plays his music, and Pluto weeps tears of iron. And Pluto looks at Orpheus and says, "How is it that of all mortals who have tried, you alone were able to arrive in my realm?" And Orpheus's answer is, well, love is stronger than I. And you can understand that on the level of his love for Eurydice, but there's another level at work too, because his music, his art arises from a love that is able to accept and bring into harmony every aspect of his reality. And so in that process that we all as individuals face of coming to terms with fear, the first step is the mythic journey that Orpheus made to reunite with Eurydice. And the irony is that once you do arrive at that place, once you can come to rest on the pelvic floor, in the pelvic bowl, you come to rest in your being, and you experience the only true security that we have as human beings, which is the security of being. And once you reacquaint yourself with that and come to trust it, then you've gained a choice, really. You've gained a choice that when that cold hand of fear begins to take hold of you, you've now got the choice to come home. And not to underestimate the journey in any way, because as I find in my workshop, as I encourage people to drop down through their bodies, they do encounter, just as Orpheus did, shadows and terrors, and with patience, with love, they soften, and you come home. And then once you're at rest in that place of being, things can begin to integrate. And we as a culture have lost all sense of what it means to integrate. We're so good at gathering information, more and more and more information, and in the idiotic notion that if we gather enough bits of information, we'll fill all the holes and in our knowledge, and it will create an entire whole, complete knowledge that will save us. And there's no such thing as a sufficient number of bits of information that will create a seamless whole. The whole there's that, so many people have that continuous loop of chatter going on in their heads because it's that verbalization is trying to represent the world and sort it out and get an accurate picture of it. And down in on the pelvic floor, there is no verbalization, but it's a completely different way of knowing that we mistrust because it's not objectifiable. And eventually you might put words to it, but the depth of information you're gleaning about the world at rest on the pelvic floor so far surpasses anything that could be put into bits and pieces of data. It's the difference between sort of the hand of the world, the felt wholeness of the world, touching you with a mother's caress and communicating thereby the love and presence of the world in all its specificity, and how deeply that informs you, versus being handed information, factoids about the world, and how much they will inform you about the world. It's feeling. Rachel Carson wrote how it's far more important to learn to feel the world than just to think about it. And it's through an honoring of our capacity for feeling that we move ourselves towards wholeness.
I was thinking when you were talking about Orpheus and Eurydice that the Holy Grail, the chalice that we've been looking for forever, is probably our own pelvic bowl. That's the bowl. That's the bowl of life.
That's so beautiful, Joanna. It is.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You manifest.
I think of it in several bowls. I think of it as like the original beggar's bowl that receives into it all the gifts of the world.
Yes.
And I think of it as a singing bowl. Anytime I hear a Tibetan singing bowl, I can feel that. I can feel my pelvic bowl answer and sing along with it.
Well, anytime I feel something deeply, that's exactly where I feel it. And most of the time, that comes to me from music. My ability to feel most really seems to come from music. Do you have any music you could recommend for getting in touch with the aliveness of one's pelvic bowl?
I can tell you about music I love with a passion. In fact, there's music that I tend to listen to when I'm writing. It just helps me write, and it tends to be by and large viola da gamba, and the viola da gamba is an early Baroque instrument that is like a precursor to the cello. It has an extra string, and to my ear, it has a slightly rougher, a slightly less refined sound. But what's fascinating or so compelling to me about the music of that era is that the music, and particularly, these are composers we don't hear much about. There's Johannes Schwenk, Tobias Hume, Murray, Saint-Colombe. It's a treasure trove of music, and what a lot of music I love in particular is just two violas da gamba playing together, and And it is so unlike the music, for example, of Beethoven, which I also love. Mm-hmm. But the music of Beethoven is building towards a climax and a resolution.
Oh.
The music of the early Baroque, the viola da gamba, it is a conversation. And it is like being privy to a conversation between long-standing friends with this deep love and intimacy with each other who have no desire to resolve anything. They're just enjoying each other's company. And it reminds me, can I tell you a little story?
Of course.
There's a great psychologist in the States, Douglas Heath, and I heard him talk years ago. And he talked about his daughter would come home from university, and she and her mom would sit down at the kitchen table and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And Douglas would listen to this and get very irritated because they never came to the point. And he waited for them to come to the point, and they never went. And he'd get up and leave and come back, and they're still talking and still haven't come to the point. And eventually he realized,
this is what it's about.
Yes, they're just exploring their relationship. They're not trying to come to a point.
That's
and so for me, that's what this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music is about. It's just the most refined conversation, and I hang on every phrase.
Oh yes, I feel the same way, as you know. I wrote down from your book, Chapter 11, The Horse and the Rider, the original power trip. And I find this very interesting, and I was wondering if you could tell us a story about this, some of the story that's in the book.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. In part, it addresses several mysteries that no one seems to explain. One of those is, why did we turn our backs on the goddess and look to the gods in the sky? Mm-hmm. Another mystery has to do with the Indo-European family of languages. And this is bizarre because, at a certain point, there were all these little language groups and little diverse cultures, and it was like this brush fire that swept the world from Ireland to India and took over or homogenized the languages, the belief systems, the hierarchies, the values of all these cultures, and they all fell under the influence of the Indo-Europeans. And how did that happen? And the other mystery in this group has to do with our felt center of consciousness, because early on we, late Paleolithic, early Neolithic, so 10,000 years ago we experienced our center of thinking in the belly, deep in the belly. And at a certain point, that began to rise up through the body. So by Homer's day, he uses a word phrene that we translate as mind and diaphragm, two very different things. But in ancient Greek cultures, that is where they experienced their thinking, that is where they understood the mind to be. And then, of course, we ascended from there into the head. So all these three puzzles, to me, are sort of clinched when you understand the Kurgan culture. Now, the Kurgans were a sort of collection of tribes in the Russian steppes, and to the best of our knowledge, they're the first culture to have domesticated the horse. And we were, at that time, we were in the throes of the Neolithic Revolution, which was radically changing our relationship to the world, because we were, learning about agriculture and the power of saving seeds and planting them and claiming this piece of land but it's my land, and suddenly this plant on my land is a weed, and that animal coming into my land is a vermin, and the whole world is being divided. And you no longer look at a tree as the living manifestation of the goddess, but suddenly, you're looking at a limb of it thinking, well, that would make a good ridgepole for my house, because we started to build permanent houses. And so our whole orientation to the world was shifting, and we were straining against our allegiance to the goddess, because the goddess speaks to our being and the abundance of being and the swirling energies of the world in which it participates. And we were chafing towards doing. And here are the Kurgans, and they domesticate the horse. Now, I think of how that must have changed them. And along the lines of Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. You get on the horse, and sure, it enables you to do many things, but what it is actually most profoundly changing is your own being. And in the same way that if you sit on the saddle of a Harley Davidson and let the engine roar, that little thrill of power you feel within yourself, or you sit in a souped up car and you touch the accelerator and you feel that power just at the ready to be deployed at your merest whim, and how that changes how you are. And suddenly you're on this horse and you are physically separated from the earth. So the horse can go through mud streams and you don't get dirty or wet. And you can ride, and herd hundreds of horses as the Kurgans did, and cull them and slaughter them in a way that a man on foot simply can't. And having felled a horse, you can drag it home behind your horse to feed your family. It empowers male doing in a spectacular way. And so the Kurgans, this culture of horse riders, developed a radically new culture. This new culture was one of empowered male doing, and it's male doing that can absolutely dominate being in the same way that a man astride a horse can dominate the horse, and you can tell the horse to run or stop or turn, and his whim is the horse's command. And it throws into question the entire notion of the goddess in a way, because, well, is the goddess manifest in the horse, and are you now dominating the goddess? Or maybe the deity, is more like you astride the horse. Maybe the deity lives up in the sky and can't be dominated, but simply dominates from that heightened perspective. And so the Kurgan culture developed hierarchies in which men became the rulers and women were not permitted to be rulers. They evolved gods in the sky, and eventually those gods rode chariots through the sky, and their whole culture and hierarchy and belief system provided the Neolithic communities which were chafing against the goddess allegiance. They were becoming doers, and they had no imagery, they had no paradigm or metaphor by which to express that. And along came the Kurgans, and they provided the metaphor. They provided the metaphor of empowered male doing and gods in the sky and men in charge of home and world. And it swept like a brush fire. It swept, the cultures just fell to this because it expressed what they themselves were moving towards. But I really think it was the horse in the Kurgan culture that provided the impetus towards the development of this new patriarchal culture that, of course, today we all live within.
Well, two things came to mind when you were talking about this, and one is that one of the things that Cortez did is that he brought horses with him on his conquest. And that was really, I want to say mind-blowing, but I was going to say reality-blowing for the people who already lived here. It was a big factor in, yeah.
And our early image of the centaur was a product of people seeing these men on horses and not being able to understand, except to understand it's a new kind of creature, with a man's body and a horse's body fused.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then I was thinking my riff was going in the direction that then John F. Kennedy came along and he decided that in order to feel like the most powerful nation on earth, we should go to the moon. And it seems that since then, our so-called civilization has been on a downward spiral. And I'm wondering if that particular way of riding power showed us that that's not where it is. I mean, the image of the Earth from space, as it has been said many times, has done more to put us in touch with our planet, at least some of us, than any other image. So, I'm just...
And on the other hand, this idea that you can do anything if you create the right machine and ride it to your destiny.
That's
and whether that right machine is an MRI scanner, whatever it is, we've got this faith in technology, and not technology. Technology is brilliant, but it's not an unmixed bag, because the more we lean on technology, the more we distance ourselves from the tangible moment. You think of what a screen does. A screen doesn't make the present more tangible. A screen makes the present go away. And we are making the present go away as we lean increasingly on our ability to understand and manipulate matter in a way that completely eclipses our ability to understand and surrender to our own human nature. And we don't even understand anymore what self-knowledge is. Our only way of understanding self-knowledge is to understand it as a collection of facts that, well, I like chicken soup and blue is my favorite color and this is my career and this is when I was born, and these have nothing to do with true self-knowledge. And technology provides, you take an MRI scan and it provides this sleight of hand almost that gives you the impression that you're learning about yourself. And it's just, that's not what self-knowledge is. Self-knowledge is born in you by your loving attention to the world around you.
So that's much what I love about your book and about you, is that you are shining a light for us on what it is to be human. And what I hear you saying is that what it is to be human is to return inside ourselves, to the very base of our being.
I talk of the pelvic floor exactly in those terms, as the ground of our being. And we cannot nourish ourselves if we're cut off from the ground of our being. And as in the same way, the world can't nourish us when we're cut off from the ground of our being, because it's when you come to rest on the ground of your being, you're coming to rest in the world's nourishment.
How is the ground of our being like the ground we walk on, the ground that supports us, our mother planet? How are they the same?
There's an ancient Native American understanding that if you're wounded and you lie down on the ground especially with that wounded part of yourself in touch with the ground, that it will help your healing. And there are all kinds of ways in which contact with the earth is understood to promote healing. Healing, the word for healing is related in its roots to our word for whole. Heal really means to make whole. And when you come down to rest on the pelvic floor, it's a similar thing. You're coming to a place of healing or a place of wholeness. And there's people might be wondering, well, what about the legs? And to me, the legs are like the roots of our being, like in the way that the tree roots sink deep below the earth, the ground. There is so much energy, and not just energy, but information. Information, not in the sense of broken bits and pieces, but information in the sense of a waveform that informs you. And by being informed, you come into harmony with. So as you're informed about the present, you come into harmony with it, and that harmony itself is a source of healing. And we don't harmony is another of those things. It's like self-knowledge that we sort of lost track of, or it's like our backs that we've lost track of, that has been thrown into the shadow. We don't value harmony. We substitute control for harmony and mistakenly think they're roughly the same thing, when in fact harmony and control are exact opposites.
Yes. Well, you brought an image to my mind when a few years back I found myself in the Amazon forest in Peru, and sort of feeling that finally I had come to the heart of the planet. And I looked down to the ground in this dense forest, and the ground was roots. There was no flat ground. All of it was roots crisscrossing into each other. So in the Amazon forest, the roots were completely exposed.
Beautiful. And as you say that, I can feel interlacings of relationships entwined and rooted and understood in a way coming up through my legs and making sense as I'm at rest in that place in the pelvic bowl.
Like we are roots of each other. What if we could walk around and see each other as roots of each other? What if a way to say my brother or my sister would be to say, hello, my root?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
That's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is in its revelation of the truth of it at the same time. Wow.
Because when I speak to my root, when I speak to you, in fact, that's when I feel grounded. In my deep relationships, that's where I feel grounded. That's where I belong in the earth.
Yes. And just like the early Baroque music of the viola da gamba, that rootedness is an intertwined conversation that nourishes both parties.
Beautiful. And our roots that are listening to us. Yes.
Yeah.
So, Philip, what I feel moved to ask you is go into yourself, which you do a beautiful work of being in yourself. And since you're coming off this weekend that you shared with people, tell us the most precious things that you learned from teaching.
What a lovely question. I've learned how profoundly people yearn for their own wholeness, and what a genius each individual has for it if given a little permission, a little encouragement, a way of taking the next step. And there, as that happens in the process of the weekend, there is so much love seeded in everyone's heart. It's like a little love fest, at the end of the workshop, because there's been such deep, intimate work, such vulnerability, such courage, all shared and supported by everyone. So people know, they know so deeply that what they really want isn't success as it's presented to us by our culture, that the real success is wholeness. And you begin to understand, my gosh, if we just modified a little bit our idea of what success is, and we tweaked it so that we deeply understood that to be truly successful meant to be truly whole, how everything in our culture would change, and suddenly our cravings, our addictions that drive us would just be put to rest, because when you come in touch with your being, you come to that place of profound security, and you're not empty any longer. You're not trying to fill the hole within yourself. And at the end of the workshop, there's such a softness in the faces and a light in their eyes, and I'm left with the best feeling in the world.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much, Phillip Sheperd. I have such a wonderful time being rooted with you. And let's do this again next month.
I would love to. It's a radical adventure. Knowing the word radical actually means rooted.
Oh, it does. I didn't know that.
Yeah, radical comes from a Latin word, I think, for root.
Oh, perfect. Absolutely perfect. All right.
Big hug to you, Joanna. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philip.